Okay, we are on Pei Gimel 83 Amud Aleph, side A. Now, the truth is that for the purposes of our discussion with respect to someone who's not well in Yom Kippur, as far as the halacha goes, you only need to learn about the next 3 lines, or just 2 actually. Everything going forward is not in the Shulchan Aruch, and after, there's going to be some concluding commentary on the main point of our discussion today. Then there's going to be, I don't think Gemara is going to follow afterwards on just generally speaking remedies for various sicknesses that they used to deal with back in the old day. And the Gemara is going to get into lots of laws of Shabbos. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn the Gemara today. We're going to understand the main point of this Gemara, which is going to be brought in the Shulchan Aruch, the commentary on that, and then tomorrow we're going to get to the Jewish law. We're going to learn Tafresh Yud Zayin and Tafresh Yud Ches, which is 617 and 618, which is the laws of pregnant women and the laws of sick. Because after today's Gemara, we will learn all the relevant Gemara's text for those Mishnah, for those 2 chapters in Halacha. And then after we finish the Shulchan Aruch, we'll get back to the Gemara, which is going to be somewhat sidetracked from Yom Kippur for about 2 pages or so, connected to Shabbos, connected to healing in general. And then it'll get back to Yom Kippur, but primarily with issues of Teshuvah. So I think we're on track to actually finish this before Yom Kippur. We're on a good track. And this was the plan when we started, and I'm happy to see that time-wise, it looks like we're going to be able to do it. Hope so. Okay, so we're just in the Gemara after the Mishnah. So there's a big Gimel Mem, and then there's Taf Reish. Tan Rabban, our sages taught, we're quoting a Mishnaic age text, which reads, how do we know that this person who we talked about yesterday, who had this sickness called bolmus, which is some sort of sickness that comes as a result of hunger, and the symptoms are, or one of the symptoms are, starts to lose his vision. And we said that the person is fed on Yom Kippur or even non-kosher food until his vision starts to return. So how do we know if his vision has returned? How do we know if his vision returned? So says the Gemara, if he's able to differentiate between good and bad. At this moment you might have thought this means just visually. So Abai explains no. Abai explains with taima, in the taste and the flavor. So if he can differentiate between good and bad flavor, taste, means his vision is returned, which means that another symptom of bolmus is not just the lack of vision, but lack of taste. And the Gemara is telling us that the 2 are interconnected, and that when his taste is returned and he can tell the difference between good tasting and bad tasting, then we know his vision is returned. Why can't you test it visually? I'm not sure. I was wondering along this, why can't you just see? Can you see the difference between this and this? Tell us what color this is, tell us what color that is. So it could be it's a precursor and the vision returns. Okay, that's interesting. I haven't thought of that. Maybe this is an indicator that he's about to get his vision back. So you can stop giving him, and this is a bit before. It's a good way of thinking about it. Another thing I was thinking about is that maybe this guy had poor vision to begin with. If you're talking 3 glasses a day, and the guy has a prescription that we would think of today as 400, 600, his vision is blurred to begin with. But he's not sick, his vision is impaired. So how do you know if whatever vision he lost because of the sickness is returned? If you can't ask it visually because he's anyways partially visually impaired to begin with. And now you have another way of testing it. See if his flavor came back. Maybe. It's much less likely that a person gets older and he loses his taste. It's much more common a person gets older and loses his vision. I mean, most of us here are wearing glasses. So in the old days, before glasses, I imagine we'd be partially blind, or at least blurry vision. Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay, maybe. As in these 2 indicate to you that this is actually a result of the sickness rather than, yeah. Well, it seems like bolmus has other symptoms. This is one of them. One of them is impaired vision. That's what it seems like. And it also seems like Abaye is saying that they're one and the same. That when we first said the way you check for, that you have to know his vision between good and bad, that means flavor, as if like flavor is the ultimate barometer to know if his vision is back. Be interesting medically to see if there's if we can identify some sickness today related to not eating, extreme hunger, that results in lack of vision and lack of taste. Sorry? To see if you can see, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now the next line here, this is the primary line I was referring to earlier. That is the main point of today's Gemara learning, and that's going to be a big foundation for the Shulchan Aruch, for the Code of Jewish Laws, when we learn it tomorrow, God willing. And it's really just one line. And the Gemara afterwards is commentary on that line. So this is the line. Tan Rabban Sages taught, Misha achze bulmus, one who has been possessed by this sickness called bulmus, again, the sickness that's a result of extreme hunger, lack of vision, lack of taste. So machilu noisai, he's given to eat, as our Mishnah said, non-kosher food, or if it's Yom Kippur, you feed him on Yom Kippur. If you have to break Shabbos, you break Shabbos. But says the Gemara, says the Brisa, hakal, hakal. You start with a lighter prohibition. So if you have multiple foods in front of them and they're at various different levels of prohibition, you start with the one at the lower level of prohibition. See, well, apparently he might. That's the point. This bulmus will make him die, apparently. Sorry? Yeah, I Google it. Maybe make you find something. I don't know. I wonder. Maybe did you see Stein? That's what he said about bulimia. Does bulimia cause lack of vision? Bulimia is a disease, but it comes from. Right, I know bulimia, but does it cause lack of vision? Interesting. Right, the problem with bulimia is they can't keep food down, so feeding them doesn't necessarily help them. You gotta get an IV tube if it gets that extreme. But I wonder what they did back in the day. Interesting, bulimia, maybe. Sorry? Bulimia, sure. I mean, I met people who suffered from it. It's terrible. It's terrible. Yeah. Because they have to get IV drip if they're IV, yeah. She said if it gets to that extreme, you have to do IV, and then they have to have psychological work to help the person deal with eating the disorder. Yeah. Because even pills, if it gets really extreme, even pills they'll purge. Or drugs. Right. Yeah. Should never know these things. But anyway, the Gemara here says that we feed the person hakal, lighter, less strict sins. So there are different types of prohibition, different levels of prohibition. And you try to minimize the amount of prohibition you are doing when feeding this person. That's the general rule. And the Gemara is going to give examples of this. So number one, tevel v'nevela. So the person is suffering from bulmus. We need to feed this person. And there are two options in front of us. A dead animal that hasn't been slaughtered ritually. So it's a kosher cow. It's a kosher animal, but hasn't been prepared properly. It hasn't been shechted. It's died naturally or it was killed some other way. That's not treif, it's nevela. We refer to it as treif because we've classified all non-kosher food as treif. But technically treif is a kosher animal that was slaughtered properly, and then we discover that it suffered from an illness before its death, and therefore it's not kosher. That's technically treif. That's not the case here. Although I think the same law would apply, that's not the word used here. The word used here is nevela, and nevela is a kosher animal that died of any other cause other than ritual shlita, proper slaughtering. But the truth is, it really would apply to most non-kosher meat. This is what we're about to say. So the option number one is nevela, non-kosher meat, meaning the kosher animal but non-kosher, not prepared properly. The other option is, not shechted, not ritually slaughtered. The other option is tevel. Now, tevel is produce from which truma has not been taken. So the tithes, the necessary gifts that a person is supposed to give from their produce to the kohen and to the Levi, have not been taken from this produce. This produce is forbidden to eat until the proper tithe has been given. This is referred to as tevel. Now, this tevel, the one is liable for capital punishment at the hands of heaven, not in the court. Hashem decides whether this person should live or, God forbid, not. I'm sure God is very forgiving, but technically speaking, this is the law. So which would mean that tevel is a worse sin than nevela, because nevela, non-kosher animal, is a question of violating a biblical commandment, not even a prohibition. It's actually a violation of a positive commandment. Thou shalt prepare thy food properly. That's not literally what's... No, nevela, Rashi says... One second. Oh, Rashi doesn't mention nevela. You're right. Sorry, I was thinking about shvius. You're right. This actually is a lav. But nonetheless, it's a prohibition from the Torah, rather than tevel, which is not just a prohibition, but actually liable from capital punishment at the hands of heaven. And therefore, you have the rule we just said is you give the more lenient non-kosher food, and therefore in this case, machilin I say nevela, you give them the non-kosher food, the non-kosher meat, rather than the tevel, rather than the produce that hasn't the produce from which the proper tithes have not been taken. Tevel is capital punishment at the hands of heaven, whereas non-kosher meat is a question of a violation of a commandment in Torah. It's biblical, certainly, but one has capital punishment in the hands of heaven, and one has malchus in the court. At best, it's lashes in the court, right? So because the punishment is lower, that tells us that the prohibition is lower, as it were, and therefore you give them the lower prohibition. And in this case, between the untithed produce, tevel, versus the non-kosher meat, give them the non-kosher meat, if those are the only two options. Obviously, if there's kosher food available, give the kosher food. Also, a question of timing. That's right. Yeah. As opposed to running down this. Yeah. Well, how and what danger? What's the patient? What kind of danger the patient's in? Okay, so that's scenario number one. Tevel, untithed produce, and the vela of non-kosher meat. Now, what happens if there's tevel? There's this untithed produce, the shvius, and produce from the 7th year, which means it's not actually from the 7th year, but it's actually from the 6th year after the 7th year begun, and you're supposed to get rid of all your produce before a certain time. What did I say? Sorry, I meant 7th to the 8th. After the 7th year is over, I'm sorry, I thought I must have said that. After the 7th year is over, you have to get rid of all the produce from the 7th year, and then you go to eat from the 8th year. So this is after the time of when you're supposed to get rid of the produce from the 7th year, and therefore it's forbidden to eat this. But that's only a violation of a positive commandment. Thou shalt get rid of your 7th. I'm thinking of Kisavai, mixing up. But I'm thinking of Biartika from the bias, that's something else. But Shvius is a similar possible. The Torah says to get rid of all the produce from the 7th year at the end of the 7th year. And therefore, this person only he failed to do a positive commandment. And that would be the violation here if we were to feed the person Shvius. But tevel, eating untithed produce, that would be a problem of capital punishment that happens in heaven. And therefore, if the option is untithed produce versus produce that is left over from the 7th year, shvius, you give the person food from the leftover 7th year. Because it's a lower violation. We mentioned available. Oh, nevela and shvius, yeah. Good question. What are you going to say? The tevel and the shvius? No, because you don't give shvius and tevel you could technically mix them together physically, but they're not of the same category because shvius, the stuff left over from the 7th year that you don't give, it can't be the same crop because produce from the 7th year, you don't take any tithes. You got to get rid of the whole thing at all. Yeah, no tithe at all. Tevel is produce that you're supposed to eat, but just only after you've given the tithe. Right? So they couldn't be the same batch. The 6th or the 8th or new stuff from the 8th year. And 7th all has to be get rid of. I hope they're not, if you ask me. Why would I want somebody else to be punished? So why should I want them to punish because they're breaking the law? So saying, so why they're not punished? Because God is very merciful, and God's very kind, and God understands that the Jewish people have gone through enough. He understands that people suffered enough, and he understands it's not their fault. And he's hoping that people like you and I are going to inspire them to get a little better. That's my answer. That's for somebody who's legit deserving of karas. I don't know that today people are legit deserving of karas. Dr. writes this in Tshuva, part 3 of Tanya. Describes why there's no karas today. But he's talking about people who legitimately deserve it. I'm not convinced that people today are legitimately deserve it. Actually, in fact, I'm pretty convinced that legitimately they don't deserve it. Recent history that has brought Jews to where they are today is a more than better explanation for why they're not keeping the laws as they're supposed to. That's what I'm saying. That what we've gone through that led to the Jews today, the fact that we have this building and we're all doing this, that's the miracle. That's the anomaly. The fact that people are breaking the law is understandable. The fact that there are a bunch of people who keep in the law, that's the anomaly. Yeah. Right. But I think.
Are you crazy? It's so expensive.
Yeah. But to me, the more important answer is, even if according to the law you meet someone who absolutely is deserving of punishment, why should I want to get punished though? What do I need? God doesn't. That's what I keep on saying. God does not need lawyers. Hashem doesn't need lawyers to defend himself. Our job is to defend our fellow Yidden. You find a Yid who, by your imagination, is absolutely deserving of punishment. In your mind, you should find a way for him not to deserve punishment. I'm saying so he's not going to get punished. What's going to happen? Nothing. Good. He won't get punished. It's okay. God doesn't need defense lawyers. Jews do. At any rate, sidebar. Okay, so we have 2 cases so far, what? Yeah. Yeah. What I'm saying is even if legitimately the person's, let me put it this way. If you were called on in God's court, to bear testimony on somebody else, what would your hope be? To be the accusatory or to be on the defense? I would hope that you want to be on the defense of the Jew, to defend him from getting punished, if you were called upon. I would hope that's what you want. Yeah, you want to be the guy who you're gonna feel happy about yourself because somebody else is getting punished. What for? Not just because you want the guy to defend you. Because as a Jew, what do you want other people to get hurt for? Why would I need that for? For some justice that exists? Don't worry about justice. Don't worry about God's justice. Hashem will take care of his justice. Don't worry about God's justice so much. Worry about Jews and make sure that they're happy, make sure that they're well, and try to inspire them to get a little closer, through love and through embracing, through sharing, through kindness. Anyway, okay, I want to finish this Gemara before so we can get to Shulchan Aruch tomorrow. Okay, so we had 2 cases so far. Tevel, untithed produce, and Nevela, non-kosher food. Then go with non-kosher animal because untithed food is a question of capital punishment by the hands of heaven. Choice between untithed food and leftovers from the 7th year. Give them leftovers from the 7th year because that's only a violation of a positive commandment. Whereas Tevel, the untithed food, the untithed produce, again, that's a question of capital punishment at the hands of heaven. Now we get to a more difficult issue. Yeah. Doesn't mention here, but the Mai is only rabbinic, whereas all these issues here are biblical. That's correct. So the Mai would be first before you give Tevel, for sure. Even before. Yeah. If you have a question between rabbinic prohibition and biblical prohibition, you always choose the rabbinic prohibition, for sure. So even if it's a question of Nevela, unkosher animal, versus Dmai, you would take Dmai, because Dmai is only rabbinic. It's only rabbinic. In fact, if the person's poor to begin with, you can give someone Dmai. Right? If someone's poor. Anyway. Okay, so why the Gemara does this doesn't matter. Okay, so the third case the Gemara says is Tevel u'Truma. Untithed produce and Truma and actual Truma that belongs to the Kohen. So this person who has bulmus is not a Kohen, or not the daughter of a Kohen, or not married to a Kohen, and therefore cannot eat Truma. And there's option between Truma and Tevel, both of which are capital punishment by the hand of heaven. So which one do you choose? Says the Gemara, Tanaihi, this is a dispute. Tanya, we learned in the Mishnah text, Machilin Oisai, Tevel, one view, Rebbe's view, as we'll learn, is that you give the person the untithed produce. The ein machilin is a truma, but do not give him the truma, because he's not a kayin. But Ben Tema Omer, the scholar, Ben Tema says, son of Tema says, truma, give him the truma of a loy tevel, but don't give the untithed produce. So now Rabbi is about to qualify. Amar Rabbi qualifies. When, so let's say you have, make it easy. Let's say you have 100 ounces of tevel, untithed food. So all you need to do is give 10 ounces, and the rest of the food's okay, because you give 10%, or whatever, more than that. You have to give truma and meiser. But let's just make it easy. We'll say it's 10%, because it's a little bit more than that. Let's just say it's 10%. You have to give away 10%, and then the rest of the food is kosher and good to go. It's no longer tevel, it's now chulin. So how much does this person need to eat to survive this bulmus? If the person only needs to eat 90 ounces, then you're fine. Give the tithe, and then let him eat the rest. Yeah. That's why I said it's more than 10%. Sorry? Right. The truth is that that's right. You actually, but it also depends. Sorry? Meiser is redeemed. Meiser, you go to Yerushalayim. Meiser edition doesn't necessarily stop you from eating the food. I'm just making it simple. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Let's just keep it simple. Yeah. Right. The Gemara keeping it simple, so I'm trying to keep it simple. So let's just use. Yeah. So let's just keep it simple. Let's just say the person has to give 10%. So it's 100 ounces, and he wants to give 10 ounces. And this patient only needs 90 ounces. These aren't the exact numbers. Let's just say it is to make the point. So Rabbi is saying that if the person only needs 90 ounces, you need a simple solution. Take the 10 ounces, give it to Truma, and let the patient eat the 90. And you're fine. So everybody would agree there's no reason to give the person untithed food, because you can take the tithe and then give him the rest, or untruma food, tevel, right? So that's what the Gemara says. Hey, when you can turn this into chulin, when you can turn this food into proper food by giving the truma, and that's enough for the patient to survive. No one will disagree. You fix up the produce by giving away the proper tithe, the proper truma, and then you give them the rest. So where's the dispute? Keep pligi. The question becomes, when you cannot save the person just by giving them the kosher part of it. In other words, like this patient needs all 100. The patient needs all 100. So here are your two options. Either you can take 10%, make that truma, and then 90% of what the person's eating is perfectly kosher food, and then a little bit of, sorry? It's no tevel anymore. Here's option A. The patient needs all 100 ounces. Option A is give truma, and now the patients can eat all 100, but 90% of it was kosher food because you gave away truma, and 10% the person's eating truma. Option A. Or option B is don't give truma and let the patient eat all of it in tevel. So Rabbi's changing the scenario. Rabbi's changing the scenario. He's saying here's the real dispute. The dispute is you have to make a split-second decision. Because the person's eating all 100. So he's going to be violating something. Either he's eating all 100 and you haven't given the truma yet, and if the whole thing is tevel. Or you're going to give truma right now, and then part of it is fully kosher, and the other part of it is truma. So what's better, eat a little bit of truma or the whole thing in tevel? Following? Follow? Clear? That was the original scenario. But that was the original assumption of the scenario. But Rabbi's reframing the scenario to explain the details of the dispute here. Meaning the same thing would apply to two batches. The same thing would apply. But here's an even deeper argument. Because on the spot, I can turn part of it into truma, thus saving him from 90% of what he's eating and making 90% of what he's eating completely kosher. So in other words, is it a question of quantity? The 90% or big majority of the quantity of what the person's eating will be kosher food if I give the tithe. But the little bit end is going to be a harsh prohibition because it's truma and he's not a kohen. Or let the whole thing be tevel, because tevel is not as bad as truma, even though quantitatively he's eating more prohibition. because the entire 100% is tevel. Yes, no, right. We're not getting into that. You could think of it as quantity versus quality. Following? 10% truma versus the rest of it's not. It's actually much less than that. It's actually much less than that. But I'm just giving just make it simple. It's not 10%. I keep on calling it tithe. It's not. What? Yeah. It's not actually 10%. It's much less than that. Yeah. You're allowed to choose whichever coin you want to give it to. That's another set of laws. I don't want to get into that now. I want to finish this thing. But you can give it to whichever coin you want. You have the right to decide which coin you want. Okay, but let's focus on the Gemara here. So it says the Gemara like this. Ki pligi, where's the dispute? Explains Rava that loy efshe b'cholin, when the patient needs to eat all of it, and therefore you can't turn any of it into. You cannot only give the kosher element. Mine, it wouldn't help because you have to give all of them. So Mar Savar, the first opinions of the view that tevel chomer, that tevel, eating untithed or untrumified, that's a word, untrumified food is worse than eating actual truma. And therefore, don't take the truma away and let the person eat 100% of it all as tevel. Whereas Mar Savar, the other ones of the view, Rabbi's of the view, truma chamura, eating even a tiny little bit of truma is worse than eating a whole batch of tevel, and therefore don't take the truma, let the whole thing remain tevel, and let the patient eat the whole thing. And Gemara is going to explain why. The reason for saying that tevel, untithed food or untrumified food is worse is because truma, at least somebody can eat it. A kohen can eat it. Tevel, no one can eat. So by the very fact that no one can eat this produce makes it worse than truma, because truma, at least somebody can eat it, which means its prohibition is not absolute. The tevel's prohibition is absolute because nobody can eat it, whereas the prohibition of truma is not absolute. It's 90% of the population that can't eat it. It's not an absolute prohibition, which means the food is not so bad. It's just bad for him, but not so bad. Sorry? Right, exactly. So that's right. So it's not absolutely, in other words, it's not inherently non-kosher food. Proof, because some people can eat it. Never it's not as bad. Whereas Mar Savar Truma Chamura, the other opinion is, no, eating Truma is worse. Why? Because Truma you'll never be able to eat. Aval Tevel, but this Tevel, Efshela Tzukune, you could fix it. Theoretically speaking, you can give away Truma, now you're able to eat it. So in other words, do I look at the quality? The quality of this food is such that I could redeem it. If I gave Truma, I could eat it. So tevel is not that bad because it has redemption. It's conditionalist. So qualitatively speaking, it's not inherently terrible. Or do I look at the quantity? How many people can eat this food right now? Nobody? Okay, that's much worse than at least some people can eat this because some people can eat Truma. And those are the two sides of the coin. So the Gemara now asks, I want to do a few more lines. Sorry? Yeah, which is why there's two opinions, because they're both valid arguments. Yeah. Okay, let's finish. I want to finish the Gemara. So we can get to the Shulchan Aruch tomorrow. I want to finish this section. It says the Gemara on the top of Pei Gimel Amud Beis, 83b. The Gemara asks, Efshir b'cholim pshita. Rabbi is telling us that if you are capable of giving this patient only 90%, again, not the right number, but if it's only 90%, and so Rabbi says, everybody agrees, put the truma away and let him eat the rest of it as regular good food, right? As opposed to giving him tevel, right? That's what Rabbi said. Everybody would agree that if you're capable of giving him only, not all of the food, so give away truma and let him eat the rest of it in good stead as kosher, proper food. No, but in theory, if it is enough. Rabbi's first statement was that if it is enough for him to survive, and you give away the truma, Rabbi says, no issue, give away the truma. And then the Gemara says, shit, that's so obvious. Obviously, everybody agrees. What's the Rabbi's big statement? Rabbi's giving his teaching that when you could do it, give away the truma. Well, obviously, give away truma and let them eat. No, it's an easy case. So why is Rabbi even have to tell it to us? It's so obvious. Says the Gemara, no. Rabbi's actually teaching you something here. No, it's not so simple because we need this law. The Shabbos. When it's Shabbos. And Shabbos, you're not allowed to give away your truma. And the reason why you're not allowed to give away truma is because it's something called muktzah, or more properly, tiltal. You can't touch it. That's correct. anything from which you can have no, the truth is actually, over here the Gemara puts it as tiltal, but elsewhere it discusses it as an issue of metakin Michael. Misakin, but the Gemara here does not mention Misakin, which is why, again, keeping it simple, I'm leaving that out. But some instances, the Gemara discusses it here as tiltal, because there's another issue, but we're leaving it aside. Because we're not learning Hilchos Shabbos right now. So we're keeping it simple. So here the Gemara says like this, that the issue is something called tiltal. Tiltal is, if there is something that you have no use for, you cannot move it on Shabbos. Right now, all this food's unkosher, because I didn't give away Truma. And therefore, I cannot touch any of it. I can't move any of it. Now, this is only a rabbinic issue. Even Metakin Michael could be rabbinic, but for some reason the Gemara doesn't mention it here. For whatever reason. So it's a rabbinic issue. So there's a rabbinic prohibition to give away Truma on Shabbos. Says Rabbi, that this person is suffering from bulmos. Needs to eat. We have our produce. We didn't give away Truma. Should we give away the Truma so that the person can eat the rest of it as kosher? Says Rabbi, yes, even though you're violating Shabbos that way. Because at least you're saving him from eating tevel, and that way he's going to be eating kosher food. The Gemara asks, the fact that you have to give Truma on Shabbos to save someone's life is also obvious. Tiltul drabon midrabanon. This whole issue of touching the Truma, of taking Truma on Yom Tov, on Shabbos, is only rabbinic. So of course you violate the rabbinic commandment rather than violate the biblical commandment of eating tevel. Yeah? Says the Gemara, no. Hachab mayaskinon, over here is a certain situation where the Truma itself is rabbinic, which is ba'atzut she'eini nakuf. If you have a clay pot in which produce go growing. Now, the law of Truma and Meiser, all these laws only apply to Eretz Yisrael. So if you have a clay pot, to make it easier, again, keep it simple. Let's just say he brought earth from Canada, stuck it into a clay pot, and now it's growing. Does he have to give Truma on that produce? So the halacha is, if there is no hole in the pot, then we say that the nutrients for this produce has nothing to do with the land of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore exempt from Truma. If there's a hole in the pot, the bottom, even if it's not attached to the ground, by the way, if it's within a certain radius from the ground, then we say because there's a hole, then the earth below helps with the nutrients of the produce growing in that pot because of the hole. Interestingly enough, I didn't know this. I knew the halacha. My neighbor has a garden patch. He explained to me that so part of his garden patch is just in the ground, but he built these crates in which he grows certain vegetables. And I asked him why they're in crates and these are on the ground itself. So he said, because certain vegetables can grow better if there's airspace between the two sets of ground that it grows from. When he said that, I'm like, the halacha here, if there's a hole in the crock pot, it helps with the growth, and therefore it's getting sustenance from Eretz Yisrael's land, and therefore it's liable for Truma. So which means now, if you have a crock pot that does not have a hole, so biblically speaking, you don't need to give Truma because it's not getting any nutrients from Eretz Yisrael. But nonetheless, the sages say, give Truma because you are in Eretz Yisrael. So now, this produce here is only liable for Truma, rabbinically. So it isn't even a biblical prohibition to eat this. It's tevel, but it's only tevel rabbinically. And now you have two rabbinic issues competing each other. You have the rabbinic issue of tevel, it's rabbinic tevel. On the other hand, you have the rabbinic issue of not touching this thing on Shabbos. So comes Rabbi and says, take the Truma on Shabbos and violate the rabbinic commandment of Shabbos rather than have him eat rabbinic prohibited food. That's Rabbi's, and there's a law that's not so obvious because it's two rabbinic issues competing. Okay, few more lines, almost done. Okay, you know what, actually, we're just going to get into another thing. We're going to stop over here. So tomorrow we're going to... Yes, so exactly. It would seem to me the logic would be... Exactly, it would seem... Exactly. Because if you give him... that's why maybe the Gemara says tiltul. Because the Gemara says tiltul, which means muktzah, not touching, all 100% of that produce you can't touch. So if you didn't take truma, every single time you picked up that food, you were violating two things rabbinically. You were violating tiltal, because muktzah, you're not to touch it, not to move it. And number two, you're violating the rabbinic commandment of eating tevel, that's rabbinic. Whereas once you take the truma, you violated it once, one rabbinic commandment of muktzah, but now the rest of the food's kosher and you can eat it, it's no more muktzah. Because once you've taken truma, it's not muktzah anymore. So violate the command once, or actually you're only violating one command. Whereas if you ate it without taking truma, you'd be violating two commands. You'd be violating the Shabbos command of tiltal muktzah, and you're violating the command of eating tevel, that's rabbinic. Whereas once you take the truma, you violated one rabbinic command of muktzah, but now the rest of the food's kosher. I imagine that's the logic. I haven't seen this written anywhere, but that's what occurred to me. Exactly. Every single time you're eating it, you're muktzah every single time you touch it. Whereas once the truma is taken, it's no longer muktzah anymore. Because the only reason why it was muktzah is because I have no reason to eat it because of no truma. But I took the truma. Now I can eat it. No longer muktzah anymore. So it seems to me that that's the logic. That's right. And the Gemara is actually going to mention that also tomorrow. The Gemara is going to mention the issue of we don't want you to take rabbinic truma lightly because you might take biblical truma lightly. That's an interesting point. And yes, the Gemara is going to mention that tomorrow in that context as well. But okay, I want to finish the whole thing, but we didn't get to do that. Yeah, tomorrow we're going to learn the next passage of the Gemara, which concludes this little section, and then we're going to get to the Shulchan Aruch tomorrow as well. Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody.